Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Sweetheart Miranda character review today, and pretty standard stuff. The character overview, base and total stat analysis, a couple other stats that all lead up to the report card where we can look at those stats in the context of where the rest of our kit is, my general thoughts to kind of summarize everything, and then we can get into the passives, the counters, the abilities, auto priority, TMR, all those other good things that kind of feed into what my final grade is. And so, kicking things off here, for the character review, brand new light unit added to the game here as part of the permanent pool that you can pull after the banner ends. They've given her the unique main job of Sword Sorcerer with Grimoire Keeper and White Mage as the subjobs. She wields katanas as a magic scaling slash type unit similar to Elena and Sylvie. She equips hat, cloth, and accessories with a move 3 jump of 1 as a 70 cost unit, and the faith recommendation here is 97. She is a magic oriented unit. Her max range on the main job is of 5 squares away. On the main job, only 1 AoE ability and only 2 single target abilities. So she's similar to Winged Stern is that she only has 3 abilities on the main job. Now when it comes to weapon type resistances, overall some good niches here. 30% to strike, 20% to both slash and missile, some of these coming from her Transcendence upgrade. She's neutral to magic at 0 and minus 10% to pierce. Now, being a 97 faith unit, you want to be cognizant of what she can be afflicted by for status ailments. 50% to frostbite and slow, 10% to toad. Honestly, not the worst. You see slow a lot more often. Toad is kind of hit or miss, really not, Halloweenly see, and that's basically it. You don't really see the Black Mage whip it out as often as we meme that they might. Frostbite's okay too, but more for cost limited stuff, which is good because she's a cost limited unit. So the times you're likely to encounter Curry and the other Ice Girls are cost limited events, and so that fits really well for that matchup. Now for the mastery ability, what they've done is they've given her 10 slash attack res pen permanently and 30% acquired AP, which is going to be a recurring theme here, very important for her AP management. The Transcendence ability, as we mentioned, they've given her both slash and strike resistance 10% and human killer 10, so this makes her more of like a PvP more than necessarily like a PvE kind of character, where human killer really more applies to the non-PvE things where there's typically other types. But regardless, I prioritize PvP in these character reviews, so it's nice to give into that extra 10. Really not game-changing, though. Now, for the base stat overview, does skew lower overall on the base stat. And just for context, you're going to hear me like a broken record say this all the time. Being a 70 cost unit, she is not going to scale well with the barrage of 100 cost units we've had recently. So she's definitely going to look comparatively worse in many metrics, and that's going to be a theme here. But still, 70 cost is the big contextual piece here. So for base HP, definitely a smidge lower than what we've seen released as of late, but honestly not the worst in the world. For base magic, definitely a couple tiers down from where we've seen other damage dealers. Now, historically, the supports were really the top end base magic units, but the last 4 or 5 magic units that are damage dealers they've released have kind of crept into that top tier base magic stat, and Sweetheart Miranda is not one of them. She's definitely a little bit below where you typically expect. For the agility, basically average, neither here nor there, but she doesn't end up being a relatively fast unit overall. The dexterity is basically average, maybe a smidge on the below average side, and the luck kind of same, basically about average here. So base stats, not the worst in the world, but really no strengths from a base stat perspective, which not really a good starting spot to be in. And when you put in the board nodes, the mastery stats, things of that nature, for her total stats, doesn't really get much better. They do salvage that agility just a little bit. They end up giving her 10 agility points, which is slightly above average, but man, they really end up, taking her down a notch for that dexterity, the luck, and the magic stats, kind of pedestrian for a damage dealer overall. Now we look at the agility. Now no agility passives in her kit, so she is relatively average at that 78 agility when you compare characters with no passives. When you do bump her up to that green line, though, a lot of characters do have access to agility boosting things. Her not being one of them sets her back just, I think, only 2 percentage points off the average. But as you're going to hear me reference a couple times, your average nowadays when new characters are released are kind of the new floor. Like if you're below average, that's a very bad spot to be in, where average is fine, contextually speaking, but for new characters, that's really not a good sign to start out with, just for the nature of how power creep works in this game. Now, for the crit hit and crit avoid, again, relatively mundane here from the crit hit rate. Honestly, could be worse, but basically average. The crit avoidance, just because of that luck, really does end up taking a step back, so, not materially different. It's really only 5 percentage points or so from the average, maybe 10%, but regardless, definitely 2 potential weaknesses. Now, for the accuracy, the biggest weakness overall, again, there's no accuracy passives in her kit either, and so, yeah, with or without passives, she is one of the lowest accuracy units in the game, and doesn't really have any guaranteed hits outside of Holy on the White Mage sub, which is not a good thing to rely on. We'll talk about why in the ability section, but overall, very lackluster when it comes to accuracy. That's a losing fight nearly every time that you bring her. Now for evasion, also not even remotely close to being an evade unit. The luck stat, not even close to salvageable, which is kind of different from most other light units, but so unfortunately she doesn't get that synergy that many of them do, but overall, yeah, not an evade unit either. So when we get to the report card, overall, so one of the strengths that she does have is effective HP, in my opinion, for a 70 cost unit. As we saw, good double-digit resistances on a lot of those weapon types. The HP is slightly below average to kind of compensate. She does have 18 defense in her typical builds with what you'll have for 6 innate defense and 12 from passive that you'll likely have on. The overall effective HP, just for comparison's sake, is kind of similar to Gilgamesh and Ruin Stern in terms of like what they take for damage numbers and whatnot. And then we talk about survivability. What does she have? I'm going to C plus here. She does have a 35% barrier, but that is, and it's physical barrier in particular, so not a general barrier, and 35% maybe just a smidge below what others get. She is re-raise capable, and she does get 15 AoE resistance when she has re-raise active, but should you dispel that re-raise, you lose that AoE resistance, and there's a lot of dispel re-raise nowadays anyway, so that's kind of her one trick to her survivability outside of that barrier. The buff that she does have potential for, which is lower priority, but it's still there, she does have shell capability as well as 25 magic res. So although she has that 0% magic resistance, there is something here to play with if you want to kind of round her out in that category. Now for damage overall, I'm going with a B- here. You know, average magic stat, 40 spirit pen innately, up to 50 with a trust dome passive. She can get up to 70 slash res pen with the weapon. That is promising for a 70 cost unit. She does also have a buff on one of her attacks, which is a 15% magic damage increase, but the modifier on that ability is so low she's not likely to use it early in the battle, so you're not going to really recognize that damage upside. You know, obviously when you talk about slashers that scale off spirit, have done historically well just because of the resistances, so she might still pop someone for a lot of damage, but overall I'm going to temper expectations for what overall damage output is. Now for agility, going with a C- here. You know, average innate agility, but once you start putting on passives, which she doesn't have access to, she ends up being a couple points below. Overall C-. And the accuracy, gotta go with an F here. Horrendous accuracy. You technically have access to 2 guaranteed hits. They're not great options though. One is wholly on the sub job, and the other one, I'll spoil it now, is a vision card ability. Her being a katana unit can equip the Rob vision card. And so when you talk about a light cast of characters that might skew more toward evasion, or maybe have a Locke or Violet or someone that's an attack-oriented character, if you really need Miranda to have a second guaranteed hit, you can put the Rob vision card on there, but it scales off attack stat, not magic stat, so it's not going to hit very hard, even though it's a 240% mod. But still, I guess if you're really reaching to hit evade units, there's some potential there. Now, the evasion, also an F, no evasion upside. The movement, going with a D, no way to alter her move or jump, so she's a base move 3, jump 1 unit. The auto ease of use, I'm actually going with an A here. This is actually a strength of hers. That main buff doesn't repeat, that it gives herself a barrier so she won't use it twice. There's no confusing AI priorities. She'll use re-raise immediately after. So overall, the options are still impactful in terms of ramping up her auto, and only having 3 abilities, they're pretty straightforward in how the AI is really going to attack your enemies. Now the game disruption, in terms of what's the impact in the next 1 month to let's say 2 months, going with a D overall here. You know, coming into a very stacked light cast, particularly with Addison being released. Great 70 cost unit, but not impactful to the overall game balance in my opinion. Really more for cost limited things. I don't know, I even think it's hard to fit her into a team of 3, even now having Addison released and having Wingstern and having just a glut of other light options at the moment. And then you consider Bartz is coming in a couple months too, so really kind of takes a step back for priority in the team. Now, passive abilities, going with a C+ here. Not much flexibility in her passives, in my opinion. They're okay, but you really need to have 2 equipped like 80% of the time to make her usable into a sense. So overall, going with a C+. The counter abilities, I'm going with a B here. Very cool niche counter she has access to, but outside of that, the second one is fine, but not a whole lot to really alter the team fight. The overall job and kit, I'm going with a B here. The main job is fair. The sub-jobs really miss the mark, though, in my opinion. And so typically, if you have sub-jobs that miss the mark, they make up for them in the passive abilities they grant, and I don't see that happening here for her, unfortunately. So, you know, even on the main job, the buffs and utility she brings to teammates is kind of mundane. We'll talk about that soon, but relatively unimpressed for it. A final grade, and again, the context of being a 70 cost unit, I'm going with a C+ here. Very solid 70 cost unit. It's really just hard to compare apples to apples, though, when you look at the spectrum of what else you can pick for regular usage overall. She's a solid light addition, though. Definitely synergizes with the existing characters, the vision cards, where they're typically built to be strong in. But when you look at like how many scenarios in which she's weak in, when you try to figure out where she fits into a party of three, when you try to fit into the vision card synergy, it's fine, just not what you expect for top tier play. Again, compared to what else has come out, which is makes sense. We've gotten a bunch of 100 cost units. They set the bar much higher. Now, for my general thoughts overall, great cost 70, hard to justify among the other 70 and less light cost units. So for limited guild wars, when you have to take a step back on that cost, you have Engelbert, Marielle, who's one of the best, cost limited characters in the game. Fina, Phoebe, Sakura as well. Mashri is definitely feasible. So when you're talking about how do you, fit a 70 cost unit into light, they already have a bunch of options. So that's not really something they needed that gives her an immediate bump in value. There's loads of statistical deficiencies, very one trick in her build type overall, where you're going to have to kind of pigeonhole her for what you have for like AP management, for accuracy, for agility, where because she's starting off kind of on that lower end of things, you're just going to have to be handcuffed with what you can do for flexibility in your options. Now, the spirit scaling light slash does synergize very well with characters like Elena and Sylvia. Obviously, no doubt that's going to be a strong point there. The AP struggles are a huge concern, and as mentioned, does handcuff you for what you can do for some passives, for some vision cards, for some trust stone passives, things of that nature. Fun anti-missile niche, though, with the counter ability. We'll talk about that in just 2 slides here when we look at that in particular. Very unit attack oriented as well. We're on the main job. Only 3 attacks. 2 of them are unit oriented. That's honestly not bad considering how much AoE resistance there is in the game, but when you are a unit-based attacker, you have to be devastatingly hard-hitting in your damage, because the worst thing you can do is only hit one enemy at a time and either get them healed up, or it takes like 2 to 3 hits to kill them. More than that, if you look at a lot of the good single-target characters, someone like Reagan, 100 defense pen on his single target ability. Someone like Perrine has a massive unit imperil. Same thing with Dark Fina on her single target ability. Even Vega, his massive single target ability is the 25 defense imperil, and a whole bunch of good things that typically allow that unit attack to be very lethal, and I don't see Miranda having that, so I don't think it gets the same upside as many of those other characters. And obviously special mention, even for like Edward Elric, that select 2, that unit scaling stuff, like that works really well. Now for good PvE upside, in my opinion, where she's got 2 different double hits, a great double imperil limit break, so I do think there's some good stuff there for light, for PvE potential in terms of guild raids and stuff like that. The sub-jobs, again, missing important critical pieces, namely cast time down, #1, and also full life on the white mage. We'll see those more in depth soon. The teammate buff is relatively mundane in my opinion for what it offers for rainbow teams, or even just a light team, to say, is her buff impactful to teammates? It's agility 20%, magic 40%, so that agility is fine, but a lot of characters have agility boosting things. There are TMRs that have that as well, and the magic obviously makes it so that she's really only good with magic counterparts, so that buff overall is relatively unimpactful for the team overall. If the enemy doesn't have courage capability, I'm honestly kind of not sure why you would use her. I think her courage removal ability is the best thing about her. So if you're bringing her to a fight where you're not expecting courage, I don't think her upside is as great. Obviously, the permanent pool also makes it a tough sell given the low immediate disruption potential, where, yeah, you can just kind of wait it out, pull her eventually, and still get good usage. The new vision card for her is nice, but in my opinion, I think a lot of people are overrating this. This is a sub-vision card in my opinion, so there's some limitations on the practical impact when you talk about the unit bonus of like AoE resistance it gives and just things of that nature. Even the accuracy it gives is, diminished. The other thing when you talk about statistical deficiencies is that you will rarely, if never, reincarnate 70 cost units because they require UR scrolls. So when you talk about the gap between like 100 cost units or even 90 cost units and a 70 cost unit, the gap will always be even more higher on those higher cost units because you will dedicate UR scrolls to potentially reincarnating them. So you will never do that for Valentine Miranda. And so over time, that statistical gap is just going to widen and widen and widen. So looking at the passive abilities here, now Keen Swordcraft is unique to her. It's that magic 24%, decreased AP consumption of 25, obviously pairs nicely with the acquired AP of 30 that's on her mastery ability. But again, being a unit, they only give her 20% of her starting AP. So she's basically a physical damage DPS in that regard, which is very bad. So I think this is near a must to keep that damage uptime up. Clandestine Reading is the other must in my opinion, where this is her only access to spirit penetration in the entire kit. Also gives her that defense of 12. There's a case to be made. Maybe you switch Keen Swordcraft for the Dark Ward Swordcraft if you're like hunting dark teams. But even then, I think that 12% dark resistance isn't enough to make up for the decreased AP consumption loss. And the other ones are just kind of repetitive for what they offer. You already get magic buffs on some of these others. You already get HP or some survivability on the others. So overall, kind of whatever for the passives. Now the counter abilities, Greater Arrow Guard is very interesting. This is a 100% chance to proc, and it essentially reduces all missile damage by 50%. So against missile teams, really great way to reduce their damage. That being said, any kind of reaction block rate makes this counter basically useless for that survivability. So again, kind of niche in its upside. The hidden resistance I do like. We've seen that work very well with Halloween Lucia. The thing with this though, that AoE resistance of 40 does not stack with her AoE resistance of 15 from the re-raise. It'll still override it for one turn, so it's still a nice upside benefit to get that AoE res of 40 for one turn. But you already have some AoE resistance, so a little bit of overlap there. And Regenerator's fine, but I don't think her health pool is big enough to actively take advantage of the regen amount. She's still probably getting 2-hit, even if she procs Regeneration. Or 3-hit, because of the re-raise. Now for the main job buffs, her main priority here is the teammate buff Swift and Fortified to that 35% physical barrier and that agility and magic to teammates. So that's always first priority. Second one here is Re-Raise Force, where she gives herself re-raise and the AoE resistance of 15, so long as it's active. And then third priority, I gotta test this. It's either the TMR or this Shielded and Resistant, which I think the TMR does have some priority differences if it's an AoE and gets 2 teammates or not, so kind of a judgment call. But overall, these bottom 2 are the bread and butter for opening rotation. Pretty straightforward overall. Now for the main job offensive abilities, again, only 3 of them. Max range of 5. Enhancing Blade is a good ability. It's that 15% extra total magic damage applied to the end of the formula, but because of the modifier overall, it's going to be one of the last abilities she uses in this fight, so you're never going to realize that magic damage early on. Up to 5 squares away and kind of that, straight line, so you have some movement things to work out. The double arc slash is really her main ability she's going to use primarily, where it's not only a break magic barrier, but it's her slash res pen of 40 as well. So that's what gets her from 30 innately up to 70. Since it's a double hit, AoE, only 3 usages, and then Crescent Spirit Break is that Dispel Courage, 200% mod. So again, 200% mod on 2 of these is nice. But one of my concerns, quite frankly, is just you don't have a lot of abilities here on the main job. Each of these is only 3 usages, and at that point after, you're probably spamming Enhancing Blade. The reason why I say that is because if we go to the Limit Break here, and we'll talk about the other sub-jobs, the Limit Break here, very good option, 43 AP. It's a double Imperil, Spirit 25, Light Res 25 down for that enemy, but only 3 squares away. So again, you have to manage exactly your AP management, how close you're getting, so kind of difficult to always get off consistently, but on paper, it's a good one. And just honorable mention, that Vision Card ability where, yeah, 240% mod, does scale off attack stat though. You can use it twice, again, closer to range. I don't love it, but I think it's a creative way to give her guaranteed hit if you're worried about that. Now we look at the sub job for Sword Sorcerer. These are 2 more slash type attacks. Again, very short range here, 3 squares away. That's where her other double hit is here, an Arc Flurry, which honestly isn't a bad ability to have here. But again, another unit scaling ability. This other AoE one is just so close range, and it's such a limiting AoE in terms of having units adjacent to each other. The disable is kind of nice, but practically speaking, I think it's a tough one to get full value out of. But you don't really have many other good options here on the sub-jobs, where Grimoire Keeper theoretically sounds really good, but she has no cast time down in her kit, no magic res pen in the kit. And the AP values here are meant for mages, so to say use Swift End for 40 AP is like suicide from an AP management perspective when you talk about how many other abilities you need to use. So like in practice, probably not a really good sub-job, unfortunately. And while there is that, archaic healing here, that 210 mod, you also theoretically have that here on the White Mage with the Curata ability, so you get some overlap there. Holy is a nice thing, but again, you have no magic res pen, no cast time down, so maybe a little unreliable to use. No full life here is really a big demerit when you talk about like what sub-job do you use. It's tough. I think White Mage is probably the one you go with for the Cura and Curata potential, as well as Protect and Shell, just for that extra support, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but I don't know. There's so many characters that do that better, for cheaper, for quicker nowadays. Which brings us to the TMR review, and I actually think this TMR is fair. I like that it's got 3 different stats on it, 2 casts overall, decreased chance of being targeted we've seen is very good for survivability. The accuracy 30 is actually kind of nice. I don't necessarily think it's impactful for Miranda as much as it could just be for other units in general. There's a lot of other units that are really going to like this TMR, just as it pertains to bumping up that accuracy real quick for a couple turns while increasing some survivability from the hate priority as well. Now, when we look at the job-based vision cards, there's actually a ton here for the katana. The game has done a good job rolling out more of these. The thing is, not all of them are really ideal for Miranda, where a couple of them, if you'll notice, are Human Killer on 30 on physical attacks, Meeting in the Moonlight, Wish on a Winter Night, so doesn't really get the benefits there. Secret Party, which is the unique one they came out with, is a solid one, but again, I think it's a sub-vision card, so nerf some of those stats. But overall, there are some good things to look forward to, with the Great Demon being an agility-oriented card, has some strike res to help further that niche of anti-strike for her. Silja's also a good one for that extra slash res pen as well. So there are some really solid cards here to build off for Foundation for Katana users, but again, when you're looking at all the potential Katana users, or in some cases the Sword Red Mage, which has some overlap on these two, I don't know if she makes the cut. Now for the Esper Based Synergies, you want light attack, human killer, and then really slash attack, accuracy, and matchup specific things. And my two favorites by far are Bahamut and Typhon. Bahamut's the best damage dealing magic Esper in the game, but Typhon offers that slash modifier, the magic percent, and the accuracy nodes, which is hugely important. So I prefer Typhon, to be honest, but Bahamut is a very, very good choice as well. After that, Dark Ramu, again, only for the agility that it brings, as well as the human killer. But after that, you have your pick of the normal accuracy Espers, where, you know, Shiva brings that Pierce Res as well, which is Miranda's negative, so that'll bring her back to positive. Ramu is kind of that strike niche as well, where she can get that strike res off him as well as the accuracy. And then Odin, again, still one of the best overall Espers no matter what, with the honorable mentions of both Carbuncle and Valfor, where neither of them have dark negatives, so against dark enemies, these are good options. They have light attack and magic attack. Valfor's got the cast time down for if you're using the Grimoire Keeper. But again, if you're kind of limited to the Valfor just for that sub job, it's kind of not a good feeling to be handcuffed to one Esper in order to be a feasible unit. But overall, there's some options to pick from. And finally, the weapon optimization. Her blade, definitely the best one here, because there's also another 15 decrease AP consumption here, which pairs well with her passive. React block of 30, which she has nowhere in her kit. Really nice to have at least that 30% on. And the Human Killer 10 as well for some extra damage, as well as the Slash Res Pen of 20. Overall, I think this is the most superior katana for her. You do have access to the Satan, but I think overall, yes, much higher magic stat, but I think what the sword offers for the AP consumption for the Slash Res Pen, and just some of the extra, you know, Truststone passive synergies, I think that one's definitely better. So that's the Sweetheart Miranda review overall. Again, I don't think there's anything surprising here. The cost is really the biggest contextual piece to keep in mind, which she is a very, very good unit. But if you're talking resource management, what's her impact going to be? How's she going to fit into things? I think she's a solid skip for most, and just kind of wait it out. I know this is the first unit I'm actually skipping on since Agrius from Final Fantasy Tactics. I've pulled every single unit in the game since then. This is the first unit I'm actually skipping. So if that means anything to anyone, take it at face value if you will. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you all soon.